I'm Christy Pelzel, Senior Correspondent for Today News Africa, joined by my co-host, Lindsay O'Neill, political writer and reporter for Today News Africa, and our guest is Charles Ray, former U.S. Ambassador to the Kingdom of Cambodia and the Republic of Zimbabwe. Ambassador Ray is now a trustee of the Foreign Policy Research Institute and a chair of the Africa Program. Ambassador Ray, when you look at the headlines now coming out of Zimbabwe, how do you feel?
A bit disappointed, frankly. I think when the army ousted Robert Mugabe, there was a period, sort of a honeymoon period, if you will, when it looked as if the country might be turning a corner and getting into more inclusive politics, but subsequent events seem to indicate that all this was a not so subtle cover for this power. And I think that in a country like Zimbabwe, there's just so much potential that's being squandered right now because of the desire of a few old people to hang on to power and to continue having access to the riches that they've had access to for so many years.
Now, although the pandemic has not affected Zimbabwe as severely as other African nations, they're still struggling to get vaccines to the people. Zimbabwe also has a struggling economy and has for a very long time, and it's gotten worse due to the pandemic. Where do you think things stand right now with vaccines, with the pandemic, and what is the path forward?
In terms of the pandemic, the Western world, the wealthy nations really have, I think, and it's not just a moral responsibility, because it's if we leave pockets of infection around the globe, it hurts us too, eventually. I mean, in the long run, we'll pay for it. So there has to be, I think, a concerted effort on the part of the wealthier nations of the world to ensure that enough vaccines and capability to administer those vaccines get to places like Zimbabwe. And the country's health infrastructure is substandard. I mean, they have great doctors and nurses, but the physical infrastructure is just not up to par. If they start getting increased infection rates, they'll be in big trouble. So they have to get their act together and start doing what's necessary to get vaccines into the country and into arms. And the outside world needs to work with it. We need to put aside any political differences we might have now and focus on one thing, and that's beat this pandemic.
Yeah, and many of the key words that you said in that last answer kind of tie into this next question, because much of Zimbabwe struggles, which have worsened during COVID-19, Nigeria is making headlines for sustainability related issues, shortcomings in with the food crisis, the shrinking of Lake Chad affecting 30 million people, infrastructure, electricity. So all of this is kind of being highlighted, emphasized since COVID has started. Why is it so hard for developing countries like Nigeria or Zimbabwe to truly invest the billions or millions of dollars it takes to build that infrastructure to withstand times like this? Why is it so hard?
Well, that's a question that is very complicated, because when you started getting into specifics, it differs in each country. One is because of the pervasive corruption in many of these countries and poor political management or the lack of political will to do something about it dissuades investors and the types of investors you need to build this infrastructure. And that's not just international foreign investors. Wealthy people in these countries don't invest because they worry about corruption. They worry about being able to repatriate their profits. They worry about uh, ownership of titles, and it's just a whole host of things that requires a sustained political will. Nigeria, for example, which a recent speaker we had at the Foreign Policy Research Institute maintained, is not really a country in a classic sense. It's a grouping of localities, or if you will, territories that are under the control. You have the territory controlled by tribal chiefs, that controlled by criminal gangs, and they're sort of held together in a loose confederation, making it very difficult to create the kind of policy framework that encourages people to invest. The vast population is under 30, but all the people in charge, most of the people in charge are over 65. And there's this divide, and you have the majority of people being left out of decision making, being left out of being able to share the resources. And until they come up with a way to correct that, development's always it's just going to continue to lag.
Why do you think that it is happening as deeply as it is? And do you think that will change in the near future as the older generation phases out and a younger generation comes in? Or do you think it's going to be the same cycle?
Well, I'm an optimist. I mean, I think that there's always hope for better. And I know a lot of younger Africans who, if given a chance, will try to make things better. I don't want to make predictions. I'll put it this way. You have that 1% at the top who have access to the majority of the resources, and you have the rest of the population. And the middle class is either non-existent or infinitesimally small. Zimbabwe has about the second highest rate of literacy in sub-Saharan Africa. It has a population that's more than 50% under 40. I mean, we're talking generational change, and I think part of the problem is people want it yesterday. It's really hard when you're talking to people who they see what others have and they want it now, and to say, well, this could take 10 or 15 years. It's like climate change. You can tell a farmer you need to do things to protect the environment. All he's thinking is, I need to grow crops to feed my family.
Like what you were saying about the farmer not thinking about tomorrow and, economics and sustainability and setting up systems, long-term systems. They're thinking about today. And food has been a huge topic during this since COVID began. And the 2021 UN Food Summit is coming up. And they're talking about food as a human right. That old topic has resurfaced. So they're defining food as a human right as when people are deprived of access to food for reasons beyond their control. And several African countries have been accused of this, blocking food from people, especially South Sudan and Ethiopia. Is food a human right? Number one. Can food be used as a weapon of war? And why is food such an unsolvable issue? Because we circle back to this year after year after year for many, many years, maybe forever.
Yes, food is a human right, and yes, it can be used as a weapon. It is often used as a weapon. Why it is, I think to know that specifically, you would have to ask the people who do it. But I think personally, one of the reasons it is because it's one of the easiest way. I mean, if you have problems with agriculture in an area, and you're a central government, you want to control the people of that area, and they rely on the central government for food supplies, you control them because you control the food supply. Now, I think this is a horrible thing to do. To me, this is the greatest crime against humanity. Part of the problem is communication. When you go in to a country and you go in announcing what you see as wrong, you have undercut your ability to get anything useful done before you even start trying to get anything useful done. what do the people in that country think their problems are? And if you listen to them long enough and encourage them to talk, I have found quite often they will come up with the solution. And then you can start working with them to figure out how you get the resources to help them implement their solution.
Do you think that the African Union has the political will and influence to make initiatives like food insecurity and humanitarian aid work?
The Africa Union, I think the Secretariat of the Africa Union probably does, but that only works if the member states of the Africa Union go along with it. And so I would say, you know, it would probably vary from country to country. In some places where you have just very sharp divides between ethnic groups, I'm not sure that the Africa Union has the clout to do more than just make suggestions. So what works in South Africa, for example, will not work in Mozambique. What works in Zimbabwe or what works in Botswana will not work in Zimbabwe. And so whether it's the Africa Union, the EU, or the US, when we're approaching problems on the African continent, we really have to be more specific in how we target our approach to the specific country, and in some cases, such as Nigeria, to the specific region of the country.
We can't always directly affect change, but we can keep like you were saying, we can keep these discussions going to keep Africa and the US connected, and to just let people think about a way forward and the root of these issues in these different countries as individual countries. Thank you so much, Ambassador Ray and Lindsay, for your time and expertise.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I wish you the best. And I just sort of, in closing, if you will, I guess, there is a lot of potential in Africa, and I think that the more we outside Africa recognize that it is a continent that has a global impact, and the more we recognize that, I think the more it will embolden and empower people on the continent to recognize it, so that they start to step up and do the things necessary to be a productive force in the world. Because Africa will be a force in the world, whether it's productive or non-productive, simply through demographics. And we need to recognize that, and we need to start taking the necessary actions to see that that demographic impact that Africa has on the world is positive.